For those of you who know me, you probably could assume I'm not going to stand up here and talk for 20 minutes and stand behind a podium. I'm going to move around and I'm going to challenge you and ask you some questions. As mentioned, I'm the fuel specialist for the North Rim and for the North Kaibab. I'm a Park Service employee, but through a delegation of authority, I do all the fuels planning for two agencies north of the Colorado River. I strive, or our program strives, to treat anywhere from 10 to 20,000 plus acres a year, whether that's prescribed fire or wildfire managed for resource-related objectives. Clicker would be helpful. So we're going to kind of focus in on managing and mitigating smoke impacts, and it's going to kind of curtail off of what Holly was talking about. It's November, and we're moving into December, right? So how many folks in this room are burn bosses? Burn boss trainees? Okay. How about prescribed burn crew members, firing bosses, holding bosses, igniters? Me? Okay. How many air quality officials do we have in here? And public health officials? Okay. Private citizens? Fire managers, etc. What I'm going to challenge you is, no matter what our role, we're all responsible for managing and mitigating smoke impacts. And I think we've shared a lot of that the last couple days. Would you agree with that? So we're going to do a little bit of a case study. We're going to take a trip up to the North Kaibab, and we're going to visit the Jacob Ryan South prescribed fire. Fredonia's right here, two major highways. You got Jacob Lake right there. Example of some of the facilities that we have right there at the Jacob Lake area. We're going to talk a little bit about planning. Just based on that general vicinity map, what are some concerns regarding smoke management that jump out in your mind? The highways. Okay. What else? Smoke in the canyon, class 1 airshed, about 45 miles to the south or so, where we know all those drainages basically do funnel into the canyon at some point. What else? Recreation. And it was mentioned in one of the groups I was sitting in earlier today. There's private infrastructure there as well. And the Jacob Lake area experienced a pretty significant fire event in 2006, the Warm Fire. And that was a wildfire. It was a wildland fire use at the time. But basically, we decided to allow it to burn to meet resource objectives. Through the course of time, it became a large-scale suppression event. And there was a lot of drama associated with our stakeholders at Jacob Lake. We were basically accused of destroying a good chunk of the Kaibab Plateau. So if I'm planning to do a prescribed fire directly across the street from that lodge, do I have any issues? You've got to do some serious trust building, right? And when do you think that starts? It started yesterday. It started the day after the Warm Fire. Okay? We started talking about the good things, the bad things, the lessons learned, etc. But we didn't stop. That's the key thing. We might have moved in a little bit deeper into the plateau, but as we started to ramp up for coming back into the public's eye with our fire program, we shared our past successes that maybe not everybody saw because we weren't right on the edge of a highway. And we talked about our successes. We showed the number of acres accomplished, all that stuff. But we didn't stop. That's the key thing. We learned and we moved forward. Also, just around this area, we have a public campground. And I just got the numbers on my email. So visitation numbers, by the way, the price of Grand Canyon is going up. That was on my email. But 2013, we had over 5 million visitors to Grand Canyon National Park. And typically, about 1 million to 1.5 million of those go to the North Rim. Somebody mentioned the highways. Guess what? That road, that's the only way to get to the North Rim, and it's right next to this burn unit. Might have an issue with smoke impacts, correct? A lot of people want to go to the canyon. So the burn unit, 1,551 acres. It's primarily ponderosa pine. and it hasn't seen recent fire in the last 20 years. Just put that in perspective. So, well, that map didn't turn out too well on this projector, but talking about the planning. We've identified some of our maybe key areas, the highways, the visitation, the lodge. And the next step is we typically start to prepare a burn plan, right? And one of those components of that is going to be a smoke dispersal map. The black arrows represent projected daytime smoke dispersal, and then the reds, the nighttime, the diurnal flow. There again, you can see that we have impacts potentially to the highways. The lower box, that's the prescription straight out of the burn plan. Now, for the fire managers in this room, it might have been very simple to say, well, if Jacob Lake is due west of this burn unit, we probably could really look at our preferred wind directions for this burn plan. And maybe the easiest thing to do is we only burn when we have a north wind. It's a mitigation measure. What's the issue with confining yourself to that? What's that? It might not ever happen. Or typically when we experience north winds on the plateau, it's later in the season. They're typically associated with cold fronts, so we may not be in prescription. The other thing is typically those winds are stronger than what we typically see out of our prevailing south-southwest winds. So I could make the box smaller on the prescription, but now I'm looking for that precise period in time when I can implement. It's doable, but back to that planning side of things, I'm preparing for the photo up there. I'm going to have smoke on the road. I'm not going to say we may. One thing we're started talking about is we will. And we plan for that. We design our burn plans to address that. We involve our agency administrators, our stakeholders, our cooperators, whoever it is, we're painting that picture in their mind that you're probably going to have to sit in traffic for a while. You will, if we're going to burn. You're going to have smoke overnight at the Jacob Lake Lodge. And when we did this burn, it was full every night for 2 months. They were sold out. And we only received one complaint. And we'll talk a little bit about what we did. But all wind directions. So the key there is we started to talk about this burn plan early on. Holly mentioned about all that work that goes into going in the next fire season. We were talking about this project last winter, knowing that we may move into this project this past spring. So a lot of discussion and involvement well ahead of time before we ever moved into a treatment window. Might have left some few folks off, but what are we doing? So we've identified some of our concerns that we feel, but we're doing public meetings. We're inviting our stakeholders, our cooperators, the general public, and we're sharing what we've identified are our concerns relating to this project, but we're also asking for their input. And we're sharing our mitigation measures. You know, maybe we're going to have pilot cars. We're going to put signs out. We're going to staff heavy on fire information officers. Press releases well ahead of time. We're going to use NCWeb. We're going to use Instagram for photos, whatever that is. But we're also involving them in the process. It does not mean that we're asking them to approve the burn plan. Okay, that's a whole different line and a whole different process there. But we're giving that opportunity for them to be involved, engaged, and to be heard. And sometimes they do bring forward things that we haven't considered. The other thing out of this, we've really increased our capability with Arizona Department of Transportation and DPS, Coconino County, and Arizona Game and Fish. When we started talking about the Jacob Ryan South project, we knew traffic was going to be an issue. We knew that we were going to have delays. We may have lane closures, road closures, whatever that was. And we told them that we could staff that. We can handle pilot cars. We can set up road guards, all that stuff. You know what? ADOT stepped up and said, hey, we've been part of this process. That's our road. We want to help. What can we do? And we said, you know, the biggest thing for us is if you can handle traffic control, we can focus our operations on the burn. So when we did this project last month, ADOT was there for 2 days, and they did all of our road control for us. We set a trigger point. Basically, when visibility started to get to this point or less, called them on the radio, they were right there. They took over everything. They did lane closures, they did pilot cars, and then what else did we do? We had fire information officers at each end of the roadblock. And they were making contact with the public who were waiting in line for the pilot car to come and get them. And they were talking about the restoration work we're doing. Sorry for the delay. We know you're in a hurry to get to the North Rim to look at the leaves. All that stuff. But we were there sharing our message, and their concerns were being heard. The other thing we've done, we've definitely increased, and the photos didn't turn out real well on the projector, but we've really built up. We now have an entire cache of signs, and they range from the standard just roll-out vinyl signs all the way to we now have 5 of those large flashing highway signs on our zone that we've bought. They belong to us. We don't have to rent them. They're already preloaded with messages. All our folks are trained on how to turn them on, set them up, all that stuff, and we roll them out for every project we do. And it's a great thing to have out there because we can change the messages instantly with the computer program, and we can set them out as far away from the project as we need. So this is some of the burn day mitigations. Example of pilot car operations, I think most folks know what that's like, especially if you're trying to drive from Flagstaff to Albuquerque the other day. There's a little bit of road construction. Pieball. That's basically a way for us to assess on that burn day prior to putting a match on the ground to see where our transport winds are out of, what those wind speeds are. It's an indicator of ventilation, etc. And for Forest Service folks, that's now required in 5140. I'll stay away from the acronyms, but it's a really good thing. We had a comment. We just did about 11,000 acres of prescribed fire the last 2 weeks, and we had a comment come into our office. How do you guys know when to burn? How do you forecast where the smoke's going to go? All that stuff. Well, we talked a little bit already about the planning, identifying those receptor sites, the roads, the key areas. But we shared a message on a response in the next press release talking specifically about a pieball. And we put pictures on IncyWeb. We shared the graphic. You can see that the balloon went so many feet, AGL, and as it climbed, wind speeds increased. The line over here shows that we basically had a west wind. West wind's favorable for burning by Jacob Lake. But that also meant we were going to have smoke impacts to the highway, right? Because it wasn't that northerly component we were talking about. So sharing the message is really key. There's a smoke burning, coming right over and landing on the highway. It didn't stop us. And I feel it's based on our planning. It was our involvement of our stakeholders, our cooperators, and just having an accurate portrayal that we not may have a smoke impact, we will. That was the key, and we said that starting last winter. And we started working together as a team on how we're going to do that. And this doesn't matter if it's a prescribed fire or a wildfire. Start challenging yourself to be thinking about this, whether it's the planned or the unplanned event. I deal with all those visitors at the North Rim every year, and the last thing the superintendent of Grand Canyon wants to hear is that we're going to have to close the road to the North Rim for the next 30 days while we manage this fire. We might, and we have to portray that in that discussion, but there's also a lot of things we can do to help keep that road open. And we share that story. Touched on fire information, it's key. And Holly, I apologize, I couldn't find a picture of you to steal off Instagram yet, but I'll look more. And then the last thing, and this didn't turn out real well, another thing we did, I just wanted to mention, when you're designing a project or you're implementing, have flexibility. And the burn plan for this, it was written as the entire project area, about 1,500 acres. And this was actually 3 different colors, but it kind of demonstrates another thing that we did is we did 3 separate ignition operations on the project over the course of a couple weeks. We started out with hand ignition and burned about 300 acres. And then the next day we were planning to come back in here adjacent to the campground. Unfavorable winds, it was a no-go. We didn't want to put smoke in the Jacob Lake. We waited for another day, came back, did a little more, and then about a week and a half ago we came in and finished up, and we did about 1,100 acres on that larger chunk, and we used aerial ignition. But that burn plan had the flexibility to do all of that. It didn't say that you're going to just do hand ignition. It didn't say aerial ignition. It talked about the unit could be subdivided, etc. And that's kind of going back to that planning and those mitigation measures. Be thinking about that stuff this winter. And when I started out and I asked, how many fire managers, how many air quality managers, etc., what I'm challenging you is put yourself in everybody else's shoes. Think like a burn boss, think like an air quality manager, think like a private citizen with smoke concerns, etc. And take that into when you're developing that burn plan or analyzing that wildfire that you're looking at maybe for long-term management. Step outside of just your box and think about what some of those other concerns may be and how are you going to mitigate those. That's all I have.